Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Ron Lieber, who is a New York Times columnist and author of an upcoming book called The Opposite of Spoiled. Ron, a real pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time on Israeli radio.
All right. So what is the opposite of spoiled?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's something that I'm trying to answer. It began with a request from some parents in New York City who wanted me to come speak to the parent body at their schools. And the parents were having some issues around how to talk with their kids around money, and everybody was struggling. And what I knew that all of those parents had in common was that nobody wants their kids to be spoiled. Spoiled is a reflection on the parents, right? Spoiled by who? Spoiled by you, mom and dad. And so I knew that that's what they all had in common. They wanted to raise unspoiled children. But the opposite of spoiled in the English language is fresh. Spoiled was originally used to refer to meat, not to children, right? So fresh doesn't really help us in this context. So I made a list of all of the values and character traits that add up to the sort of grounded kids that we all want to kind of push out into the world at some point. Things like modesty and thrift and patience and generosity and worldliness and bravery and courage and perspective and grit. And I looked at those and I thought, wow, you can use money to teach every single one of those. And all of those values add up to the opposite of spoiled.
Okay, so I want to touch on that, but let me just clarify a little bit more about this spoiled thing. You know, a lot of people say, well, kids are always so affected by peer pressure, and we like to think that now that we're adults, maybe we're a little more immune from that. But it seems that if we're out there spoiling our kids, then maybe we're not. Is it true that the parents themselves just haven't matured enough to be immune from the peer pressure?
I think it's possible. Look, you know, we all want our kids to be happy, and it's very difficult when our children come to us and say, I mean, let's just talk about material objects for a second, although I think there's much more to, spoiling your children than just buying them lots of stuff. When they come to you and they desperately want something, it can be very difficult to say no, particularly if they have, a really bad reaction when you do say no. And so it may well be because, every single kid, at their school, or in the majority of the kids at their school, now have this phone, this toy, this, learning tool, a certain pair of shoes, and, you don't want them to feel left out, left behind, or, somehow less than, because they don't have this thing that everybody else has. And that alone is often enough to cause many parents to give in.
I was just speaking, I do interviews with all sorts of great guests on the show like you, and one of them was a hedge fund manager in New York. I've had the opportunity to speak to many of them, and his kid was about to have her bat mitzvah, and he sounded so down about it. I said, this is very exciting. This is a very big deal. And he said, yeah. He said, but do you know what so-and-so did? And he started, this was off the air, our discussion. You know what he did? He had in New York City this a PowerPoint presentation of his kid on the side of some fancy hotel outside for everyone to see. And I got the feeling, and in fact he admitted that he sort of felt that the pressure to do this kind of thing too. So it seems nonstop. It gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, you could do a whole show about bar and bat mitzvahs in America and the hand-wringing over them. Some people are now fleeing the country, for the bar bat mitzvah to, avoid all of the pressure around how big the party should be and, what the kid wants to do or what the kid expects or what, the guests expect, particularly in big cities. I mean, and people aren't just going to Israel anymore. They're going to, Mexico or the Caribbean, to these old abandoned synagogues and just doing it there with a small group of friends and family. And that turns out to be cheaper than, what the standard issue bar and bat mitzvah often is in some of these big cities. It's crazy.
Well, we'll take this opportunity to invite everyone listening to come to Israel because it's done great here. Anyway, so how do you think that children are affected by the attitudes of money in the house?
Well, I think it has a huge effect. And, what we see most often in the United States, and this is true among middle-class families and it's true among affluent families, what we tend to see most often is silence around money. And that can happen for any number of reasons. It can be because the parents are ignorant about money. They just, it's like the sort of the simple son, at Passover. They simply do not know that they are supposed to talk about this and that it would be a good idea. Then there are the ones who literally don't know anything about money and are embarrassed that they don't know how to teach anything about it, or they're really bad at it. They've screwed things up really badly in their own financial lives, and they don't want their kids to find out. Or they have a lot of money, but they feel like money is shameful, and you don't talk about it in polite society. Or they have a lot of money and they don't want their kids to know because they're worried that that will somehow poison them. So, for any number of reasons, the parents don't talk about it. But it has generally the same impact, which is that, kids, A, feel like money is something they're not allowed to talk about or not allowed to ask about, which may cause them to sort of, sneak around and look through your files, whether your computer files or your paper files, to try and figure out what the heck is going on in the family's financial life if they're curious enough. But it also may sort of, dampen their curiosity about what turns out to be a very, very important topic in their life. And you just never want to do that to a kid. You never want them to think that any question is inappropriate because, they're very busy trying to figure out how the world works. And if they get the message from you that, this is a topic that's off limits, they might, decide or come to the conclusion that other important topics are off limits, sex, drugs, other things that you actually really do want them asking about.
Mm-hmm. We are talking with Ron Lieber, who is a New York Times columnist. A couple of years ago, he won the Loeb Award, which is a very prestigious honor in the world of business journalism, and in fact, I understand just nominated for the award again. And he's working on a book called The Opposite of Spoiled. Ron, tell me something. When you talk about money discussions at home, on the one hand, you do want to be totally honest with your kids and explain to them what's going on, but at a certain point, they don't really understand all the details, and kids will worry about things perhaps to a much greater extent than we realize, and they'll feel insecure. How do you deal with that?
Well, I would think about it this way, right? There are many parents who feel like money is not an age-appropriate topic. But to my mind, there are no age-inappropriate topics. There are only age-inappropriate answers. And so you have to think about, why is it exactly that my kid might be asking a question like this? And in fact, it's a really good response when your kid asks you about money, particularly a difficult question that you're not quite prepared for. When they ask that question, no matter how old they are, the proper response should always be, oh, well, why do you ask? And you say it in roughly that tone of voice, right? You don't want it to be an accusation. You don't want to sound defensive. You're just curious about why they're curious, because often, they're asking you how much money you make, not because they want to know the answer. And in fact, if they're under 14, they probably don't have any kind of context for, what, $100,000 or, 150,000 shekels or whatever would actually mean.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking because they have some other concern. And sometimes it's a concern that you don't have enough, right? Maybe they've heard you and your spouse fighting about money, or they've made some observation that's led them to believe that the family is struggling or that the family is filthy rich, and they're asking because they're trying to figure out what the real deal is. And if you can kind of get to the bottom of that, not only can you allay their concerns, but you may also be able to avoid telling them the whole truth while also avoiding lying, which is something you never want to do with your kids if you can possibly avoid it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we also see with kids is they simply don't seem to learn the basics in school. In fact, even in Israel, my daughter came home one day from high school, and she said that someone came in was talking about checkbooks. And she said not a single girl in her class, and it's an all-girls school, and they're all in high school, so they're old enough to understand a little bit about money. Not a single one of them, except of course my daughter, because she's the daughter of a financial advisor, knew anything about the concept. Do you feel that schools are preparing children to handle the day-to-day operations of handling their money?
No, they're not. And there's some question as to whether they should be. I mean, it would certainly be great if they did. But schools are very busy. In America, we have these issues where schools are getting, less and less in the way of, budget money to do all the things that they're supposed to do, and yet we're making more and more demands of them in terms of, kids needing to perform on certain tests, less the school, be shut down or the teachers get less money. And so, there's a lot more of this teaching to the test. And the test, all these various tests have nothing to do with personal finance or textbooks, to be sure. So you can sort of understand, at least in public schools, why it's not part of the curriculum. And then there's another school of thought that suggests, well, it's really not a great idea to teach kids this stuff until they're actually ready to put it to work, until they're handling money themselves. And so if you're going to do it, maybe it makes more sense to do it at 16, 17, 20, 21, even when kids are in college or university. But my bottom line is this: schools may teach it, schools may not teach it, but at the end of the day, the connections between money and values are direct, or at least they should be. And you want to think about kind of every financial behavior that you're modeling for your kid and every financial discussion that you have with them as imprinting some sort of value, one of these values that adds up to the opposite of spoiled, on them. And because it's a values question even more than it is a money question, that's something that you want to be teaching. You don't want to be outsourcing values education to anyone but yourself.
I think that practically, though, being that statistically most parents in America are having a hard time financially. They've got huge amounts of credit card debt. We don't have to list all of their problems. And they're the people who are teaching the next generation. I agree with the values issue, but there are certainly some practical life lessons that you need in a home ec class if your parents can teach you, and I would argue that in many cases they can't.
Well, that is a good point. And, one of the things that I'm trying to do in the book is, remind parents that, assuming there are two parents in the house, that, they need to reckon, with their own financial strategy, with their own values, and with the mistakes that they've made, and hopefully in the process of getting ready to talk to their kids about this stuff, they will think a little more clearly about what they've done right, what they've done wrong, and maybe even eventually, tell their teenagers, the whole truth about whatever mistakes that they have made in the past to try and help their kids, develop the right kind of framework for decision-making that will allow those kids to avoid similar mistakes in the future.
I can see that discussion. Son, Mom and I are broke. You're 16. Time to go work in the factory.
Yep, exactly, right? Or in the very least, look, these are the mistakes that we have made. We're sorry about them, and as a result, we don't have very much saved for what will likely be a very large tuition bill, even if you go to one of the state government universities here in the United States. And so we are going to need you to borrow. We are going to need you to work. And we are committed here to doing everything that we can to helping you make the right decisions so that you don't end up, with a really tricky, debt situation when you graduate.
It sounds, Ron, like you have spent a lot of time not only thinking about this, but talking to people about it. And I know that your upcoming book, The Opposite of Spoiled, is going to help a lot of people to really get some clarity on this. We're just about out of time, but in the last few seconds, can you just tell people how they can follow your work now?
Yes, they can sign up at my website, oppositeofspoiled.com, or they can just Google my name, Ron Lieber, and they'll find my personal website and the website for the book. They can sign up for an occasional newsletter there where I'll be sort of reporting out loud as I sort this out over the next 6 to 8 months here. And I also have a Facebook page where there's more of an ongoing discussion, at least a couple items each week. It's just facebook.com/Ron Lieber author. So I would welcome input at either place from anyone who wants to join in.
Okay. Ron Lieber, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.